This video is going to help you draw from observation, specifically focusing on a still life. Our first step is just to look and to study the arrangement that is before us. So we want to look at the objects, look at what is the farthest to the left, the right, what's the highest, what's the lowest, what things are closest to us, and what things are the furthest away, what's in the middle, where things overlap each other. And we also want to look at how wide versus how high the arrangement is overall. In this case, my arrangement is longer than it is tall. So that means that I'm going to want to hold my paper so that it fits. So I'm going to take my sketchbook and move it so that it's horizontal. Our next step is placeholder shapes. So we want to block out where things are just with very loose, sketchy shapes. And we'll go back and fill these in later on, but we just want to have an idea of where everything is sitting and where it's going to be on our paper so that we can make sure that everything fits and we have an idea of where it goes and where it's placed. So some of these objects you can kind of treat as one large mass. You don't have to sit there and do all the little details right now. I'm just focusing on keeping my lines nice and light and loose. And I also like to put a little bit of context, so the cloth and the background in there just to kind of ground the objects. My next step is to go back into those placeholder shapes, and I'm going to refine the outlines and make them a little bit more detailed based on what I see. So I'm looking at heights and widths of objects, but I'm also looking at the more detailed shapes. And notice I'm drawing right over the placeholder shapes that I made in the previous step. For objects that have a lot of detail, you can do sort of some suggesting of them. For the pumpkin here, I'm thinking about that as a three-dimensional, almost a cylinder or a disc, so it's a three-dimensional shape, but it also has the little details of the segments. So I like to draw out the 3D shape first and then put those little details in there. So my drawing is kind of growing as a whole, piece by piece here. For this piece of corn right now, I'm just gonna get the overall shape and maybe a little tiny bit of detail in right now. I'm not gonna sit there and draw all the little kernels. There's another pumpkin that's sitting back there. So again, I'll draw that as a three-dimensional shape, geometric shape first, and then kind of fill in the detail. And for the pine cone and the little berries and the leaves, we can do a lot of suggesting here. It's a lot of repetition of shapes. It doesn't have to be exactly like what is there. It's not going to matter if it's the exact same for something like that. And then I also want to put the cloth in so that the objects don't look like they're floating. It gives it a sense of being grounded, and it also kind of brings us in to the drawing. It makes it feel more complete. And I like to put the back edge of the tabletop in as well, sort of a horizon line. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to erase what was left over of the placeholder shapes, because now that my outlines are intact, I don't need the placeholder shape lines anymore. My last step is going to be to sort of check my outlines, refine. I like to lighten everything up a little bit and then sort of define it and go over it. Now, at this point, you can sort of decide how detailed you want to make everything. In this case, I'm going to get pretty detailed because the medium that I'm going to use to add color and to add shading, you need to have it be precise in terms of your outlines. But if you were doing a painting or something like that, and this was an underdrawing underneath a painting, you could be a little more loose because the painting is going to show the details for you. But in this case, I'm a little bit more precise. For all those kernels of corn there, I sort of have a little trick. You notice I made a series of just kind of wiggly lines, and then I connected to indicate the kernels. It's not exactly the same like it would be on the actual corn cob itself, but you know what? Nobody's gonna know that because when they're looking at your work, they're looking at your drawing. They're not looking at the original arrangement. So if you end up changing things a little bit or simplifying things in order to best suit your drawing, that's totally fine. It's called artistic license. We do it all the time. You can totally get away with it. Same thing with the berries and the leaves and the pieces of the pine cone over on the side here. It's not exactly like what I see in front of me. I'm changing it up a little bit, but we still know what we're looking at. You can do some suggesting, and as long as you kind of give the idea, that's okay. So then I'm refining the edges of my cloth. And then I'm gonna look at my drawing and look at the arrangement. And before I go on to the step of shading and adding color, I wanna make sure everything looks good. I'm pretty happy with it. And we'll do coloring and shading in the next video.